The night sky above Earth was a tapestry of stars, serene and unbroken, until it wasn't. Without warning, the stars were eclipsed by enormous, jagged silhouettes, their metallic hulls gleaming like weapons poised for slaughter. The alien fleet had arrived. They called themselves the Khyrons, a war-hardened species bred for conquest, and their mission was clear: subjugate humanity or wipe it from existence. From their vantage in orbit, the Khyrons transmitted their ultimatum. In a voice cold and calculated, their leader declared Earth a primitive backwater ripe for domination. Surrender was the only option, or so they believed. The Khyrons struck swiftly, their invasion meticulous and unrelenting. Massive, claw-like ships descended into Earth's atmosphere, disgorging legions of towering soldiers clad in shimmering, obsidian armor. Their weapons, strange amalgamations of energy and metal, rendered human defenses nearly obsolete. Cities crumbled under relentless bombardment, their once bustling streets reduced to smoke and ash. Humanity, for all its ingenuity, seemed powerless against the invaders' sheer technological superiority. Governments faltered as their militaries were overrun. Pockets of resistance sprang up, but none could hold. Across the globe, a singular sentiment took root: despair. Miles away from the chaos, hidden deep in the dense forests of Montana, Jack Reaper Collins sat alone in a dimly lit cabin. The man once hailed as a legend among Navy SEALs had traded battlefields for solitude years ago, choosing the isolation of the wilderness over the noise of a world he no longer recognized. His hands, scarred and calloused from years of combat, gripped a coffee mug as he stared at the flickering flames in the fireplace. Outside, the faint hum of the forest was his only company. Jack had seen his share of wars. He had been sent into the most hostile territories, completed missions deemed impossible, and left a trail of whispered legends in his wake. But he had paid a price. The faces of fallen comrades haunted his dreams, their voices an endless echo in the quiet of the woods. Retirement, he thought, was his penance, a life stripped of purpose, but also of pain. The silence shattered as his satellite phone buzzed, its sharp tone cutting through the night. Jack's brow furrowed as he reached for it, his instincts prickling with unease. Few people had this number, and none would call without reason. He hesitated before answering, his gravelly voice betraying a hint of irritation. "This better be important," he growled. The voice on the other end was familiar, though laced with urgency. It was Lieutenant Ethan Grant, one of Jack's former SEAL teammates. "Jack, it's bad. Real bad. You've seen the news?" "I don't watch the news, Grant." "Spit it out." "They're here, Jack. Aliens. Real ones. They hit DC, Tokyo, London, hell everywhere. It's a slaughter. We're not equipped for this." Jack's grip tightened on the phone. He'd heard about strange lights in the sky earlier in the week, dismissed them as hysteria. Now he wasn't so sure. "And why are you calling me?" "I'm retired, remember? You're the best we've got," Grant said, his voice firm despite the chaos audible in the background. "The brass is pulling everyone in special forces, experimental units, anyone who can fight. If we don't hit back now, we're done." Jack leaned back in his chair, the weight of the moment settling over him. He had sworn he was done with war, that he'd buried the Reaper for good. But as Grant's words sank in, memories of the oath he had taken long ago resurfaced. The world needed him. "I'll think about it," Jack muttered, though the decision was already made in his gut. "Don't take too long," Grant replied. "They're not waiting for us to get our act together. We'll send coordinates. Be ready." The line went dead, leaving Jack in silence once more. He stood, pacing the length of the cabin as the fire crackled behind him. Outside, the forest remained unchanged, indifferent to the events unfolding across the globe. But Jack knew the peace wouldn't last. The Khyrons wouldn't stop until they'd razed everything to the ground. By dawn, Jack had made his choice. He opened a steel-reinforced trunk hidden beneath the floorboards, revealing an arsenal of weapons and gear he hadn't touched in years. Each piece told a story: a battered combat knife, a sniper rifle with notches etched into the stock, a set of body armor bearing the scars of countless battles. Donning the gear felt like stepping into a familiar skin, one he had shed but never truly left behind. As he loaded his gear into an old truck, a memory flashed through his mind. His hometown, a small coastal city, now likely lying in ruins. He thought of the people he'd grown up with, neighbors who had watched him leave for war and return a stranger. The Khyrons had taken enough. The drive to the rendezvous point was uneventful, the roads eerily empty. Smoke plumes rose in the distance, a grim reminder of the invasion's reach. Jack's mind was razor-focused, the years of retirement falling away like dead weight. The Reaper was back. When he arrived at the hidden base, a sense of grim determination filled the air. Soldiers, engineers, and scientists moved with purpose, their faces set in defiance. Grant greeted him with a sharp salute, relief evident in his eyes. "Didn't think you'd show." Jack smirked. "You call, I answer. What's the plan?" Grant led him to a briefing room, where holographic projections of Chyron ships and troop movements filled the air. "They're fast, efficient, and brutal. But they're not invincible. We've got experimental tech, stuff they don't know about yet. With your expertise, we might have a shot at turning this around." Jack studied the projections, his mind already formulating strategies. The Khyrons may have been advanced, but they were overconfident. That was their first mistake. As the briefing continued, Jack's resolve hardened. The war was far from over, and humanity's survival depended on the willingness to fight, ruthlessly, intelligently, and without mercy. If the Khyrons thought Earth would fall without a fight, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. For Jack, this wasn't just another mission. It was a reckoning, and he was ready to remind the galaxy why they used to call him the Reaper. The city was a graveyard. Skyscrapers that once gleamed under the sun now stood as hollowed-out shells, their jagged remains jutting into a smoky sky. The streets were littered with debris, abandoned cars, and the occasional whisper of movement as terrified survivors scurried from one shadow to another. It was the perfect hunting ground. Jack Collins crouched behind the twisted wreckage of a truck, his eyes scanning the desolate thoroughfare through the scope of his rifle. Beside him, a small team of hardened operatives mirrored his stillness, their breath shallow, their fingers hovering over triggers. The alien patrol was close. He could feel it. The Khyrons moved with eerie precision, their heavy boots clanking against the broken pavement. Their formation was tight, their weapons glowing faintly with a menacing energy. They were hunting, searching for anyone foolish enough to challenge them. Jack tightened his grip on the rifle, his mind calculating every variable: distance, wind, the angle of approach. He signaled silently to his team, a quick series of hand gestures that needed no explanation. These men and women were the best Earth had left, and they had all trained for moments like this, though none of them had ever imagined facing an enemy like the Khyrons. The aliens passed beneath a crumbling overpass, their black armor blending with the shadows. Jack waited, his heart steady, his breathing controlled. Timing was everything. He counted silently as the last of the patrol stepped into the kill zone. Then, with the precision of a striking viper, he fired. The first shot took down the squad leader, a high-ranking officer whose ornate armor offered no protection against the tungsten-tipped bullet. Chaos erupted as the Khyrons scrambled to react, but Jack and his team were already moving. Explosions tore through the air as carefully planted charges detonated, collapsing part of the overpass onto the aliens below. The operatives emerged from cover, their movements fluid and synchronized, as they unleashed a hail of bullets and grenades. The Khyrons fought back fiercely, their energy weapons slicing through the gloom with lethal efficiency. But they were disoriented, their rigid formation struggling to adapt to the ambush. Jack moved like a ghost, appearing and disappearing amidst the rubble, his knife flashing as he took down an isolated soldier with brutal efficiency. The battle was over in minutes. As the dust settled, Jack surveyed the carnage. Alien bodies lay scattered across the street, their once imposing forms reduced to lifeless heaps. His team regrouped, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat but alive. It was a small victory, but one that sent a clear message. Humanity would not go quietly. Back at the hidden resistance base, the atmosphere was electric. Engineers poured over the salvaged alien tech, their voices a mix of awe and frustration as they worked to reverse engineer the Khyrons' weapons. Jack stood over a holographic map, his eyes fixed on the glowing markers that represented enemy strongholds. Grant joined him, a grim expression on his face. "That was a hell of a hit," Grant said, nodding to Jack. "But we're still losing ground. These bastards are relentless." "They're predictable," Jack replied, his voice low and measured. "That's their weakness. They rely on their tech and their tactics, but they don't adapt. They think they're invincible. We're going to prove them wrong." Grant raised an eyebrow. "You got a plan, don't you?" Jack didn't answer immediately. He studied the map, his mind piecing together fragments of intel, memories of past battles, and the lessons learned from his time in the SEALs. Finally, he spoke. "We hit their command structure. Take out their leaders, and the rest will fall apart." "That's easier said than done," Grant countered. "Their command ships are heavily guarded, and we don't even know how to get past their shields." "We will," Jack said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "I need a team and access to whatever tech we've managed to crack. If we can infiltrate one of their ships, we can find the weak spots." Grant hesitated, then nodded. "You'll have what you need. Just make it count." The mission was ambitious, bordering on suicidal, but Jack had faced worse odds before. Over the next 2 days, his team prepared, studying schematics, testing modified weapons, and rehearsing their approach. Jack's relentless focus was infectious, and even the most jaded operatives found themselves believing in the impossible. When the time came, they moved under the cover of darkness, their stolen Chyron transport slipping through enemy lines undetected. The interior of the command ship was a labyrinth of sleek corridors and glowing panels, the alien architecture both beautiful and unnerving. Jack led the way, his instincts honed to a razor's edge. Every step was a gamble, every corner a potential ambush. They encountered resistance, small patrols of Chyron soldiers who fought with the same brutal efficiency as before. But Jack's team was prepared. They moved like shadows, dispatching the aliens with a combination of stealth and precision. As they advanced deeper into the ship, the stakes grew higher. The corridors seemed to hum with a life of their own, the energy pulsing through the walls a constant reminder of the alien technology surrounding them. They reached the central command chamber, a vast room dominated by a massive console that pulsed with an otherworldly light. Jack approached cautiously, his eyes scanning for traps. The team's tech specialist began working on the console, extracting data while the rest of the team held their positions. Suddenly, alarms blared, the sound reverberating through the chamber. The Khyrons were coming. Jack cursed under his breath, his rifle at the ready. "Hold them off," he ordered. "We need that data." The battle that followed was brutal. The Khyrons attacked in waves, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm the humans. But Jack and his team held their ground, fighting with a ferocity born of desperation. When the tech specialist finally announced that the download was complete, Jack gave the order to retreat. They fought their way back to the transport, the data chip clutched tightly in Jack's hand. Back at the base, the mood was tense but hopeful. The data they had retrieved was a treasure trove of information, revealing critical vulnerabilities in the Chyron fleet. Jack stood in the briefing room, his body battered but his spirit unbroken, as the scientists and strategists pored over the intel. For the first time since the invasion began, there was a glimmer of hope. Jack allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction, but he knew the fight was far from over. The Khyrons would adapt, and the battles ahead would be even fiercer. Still, as he looked around the room at the faces of those who had dared to stand against an enemy far superior in strength and numbers, he felt a surge of determination. The tide was turning, and he would make sure it stayed that way. The sky was dark, not with clouds, but with the hulking silhouettes of Chyron warships looming ominously above. Earth's forces had mobilized, every last resource pooled into a desperate, final gambit. The stolen data had revealed the Chyrons' Achilles heel, a central power nexus that controlled the shielding systems for their fleet. If it was destroyed, the invincible ships hovering over the planet would be vulnerable. The plan was audacious, An assault on the Nexus, located deep within the Khyrons' largest command ship. It was a one-way mission, and everyone knew it. Jack Collins stood on the tarmac of the makeshift launch site, watching his engineers prep the assault crafts. Around him, soldiers moved with a grim determination, their faces etched with resolve. He felt the weight of their hope pressing on him, heavier than any weapon he'd ever carried. They believed in him, and that belief was both a burden and a fire in his chest. Ethan Grant approached, his face shadowed under his helmet. "Everything's ready. We got one shot at this, Jack. If we fail, we won't fail," Jack interrupted, his voice firm. There was no room for doubt. Not now. They've underestimated us from the start. That's their mistake, and it's going to cost them everything. Grant nodded, though his jaw tightened. "You sure about leading the strike team yourself? If we lose you." "You won't," Jack said, cutting him off again. He strapped his rifle across his back and turned toward the assault craft. "This is what I do, Grant. I didn't come out of retirement to sit on the sidelines." The flight toward the Chyron command ship was silent. The only sound the hum of the engines and the occasional chatter from the pilots. Jack's team sat around him, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of the interior lights. These were the best Earth had to offer. Men and women who had faced death countless times and walked away. Yet tonight, even they looked uncertain. "Listen up," Jack said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, steady. "We've trained for this. We know the risks. But I'll tell you one thing. They bleed just like we do. Stay sharp, stick to the plan, and we'll come out of this alive. Let's remind them why humans are never a safe bet." The ship's pilot signaled their approach, and the team snapped into action. As the craft breached the Chyron ship's docking bay, the roar of enemy alarms echoed through the cavernous interior. The team disembarked quickly, their boots hitting the metal floor with purpose. Jack took point, leading them into the labyrinthine corridors. The Chyrons were ready. Waves of soldiers poured in from every direction, their energy weapons carving through the air. Jack's team met them head-on, a brutal clash of will and firepower. Jack's movements were a blur of precision, his rifle spitting controlled bursts, his combat knife flashing when the fight turned close. Around him, his team fought with a ferocity that matched his own, their cohesion and training keeping them alive in the chaos. The deeper they pushed into the ship, the fiercer the resistance became. The corridors seemed to close in around them, the walls glowing faintly with the ship's pulsating energy. Every step forward felt like a victory and a death sentence rolled into one. Jack led with an unyielding resolve, his mind focused on the mission, even as the cost mounted. They reached the central nexus, a cavernous chamber dominated by a massive, glowing core that pulsed with a rhythm almost like a heartbeat. The air thrummed with power, and the heat was suffocating. Jack's team took defensive positions, knowing this was their final stand. The Chyron commander entered the chamber, a towering figure clad in intricate armor that radiated authority. Its voice boomed, the alien language translated through their comms. "You fight in vain, humans. This is your end." Jack stepped forward, his rifle trained on the alien. "The only thing ending here is your reign. You've underestimated us for the last time." The battle erupted with a ferocity unlike anything they'd faced. The commander moved with terrifying speed and precision, its energy weapon carving through their defenses. Jack's team fought valiantly, but the Chyrons seemed endless, their forces pouring into the chamber like a tide. Amid the chaos, Jack's focus never wavered. He fought his way to the core, planting the charges with practiced efficiency. The heat was unbearable, the glow of the Nexus casting harsh shadows across his face. His calm crackled to life as Grant's voice came through. "Jack's status report. Do you have the charges set?" "Almost there," Jack replied, his voice strained but steady. He glanced over his shoulder to see his team holding the line, their determination unwavering despite their dwindling numbers. "Hold tight. We're not leaving without finishing this." The Chyron commander turned its attention to Jack, its voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can destroy us with such primitive methods? Foolish human." Jack smirked, his hand hovering over the detonator. "You'll find we're full of surprises." The charges were set, their blinking lights a promise of destruction. Jack gave the signal, and his team began to fall back, their movements disciplined despite the chaos. The Chiron forces pressed hard, desperate to stop them, but Jack held his ground, covering his team's retreat with unrelenting fire. As the last of his operatives boarded the escape craft, Jack took one final look at the glowing core. He activated the detonator, the countdown ticking away in his hand. The room erupted in a blinding flash of light and heat as the charges detonated, the explosion tearing through the Nexus with a deafening roar. The shockwave rippled through the command ship, its shields flickering and failing. Across the battlefield, Earth's forces seized the opportunity, their weapons finding purchase against the now vulnerable Chiron ships. The tide had turned. Jack barely made it to the escape craft, his body battered and bloodied but alive. As the ship sped away from the crumbling Chiron command vessel, he allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The mission had cost them dearly, but it had succeeded. Back on Earth, the news of the victory spread like wildfire. Humanity's resilience, its refusal to bow, had won the day. The Khyrons, for all their strength and arrogance, had been defeated by a species they had underestimated. Jack stood on a ridge overlooking the base, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon. He felt the weight of his choices, the lives lost and saved. The war wasn't over, but the battle had been won. And as long as he drew breath, Jack Collins would ensure that humanity's flame continued to burn.